But you know, because this is a small class, maybe it would be very nice if you told me what you're studying, or just tell me something, your first act of social justice, or you could tell me the worst thing you've ever done. You can choose either one. Let's get to know each other a little bit, because I'm not a huge academic. I'm a person from the ground, and I really like to know who I'm talking to. So Fina, if I don't pronounce your name correctly, please just tell me. What was your first act of social justice? You've got 1 minute to tell me.
Okay, Faina. So my name is Faina. I'm majoring in philosophy, politics, and law and Latin American Caribbean studies. And I think my first act of social justice would be around high school. My organization that I was involved in, organization that I was part of, which is called Collegiate Express, was having difficulties with the area that they had as a nonprofit organization for students. And so we just marched, I guess, in a sense, marched for the rights for that community, for the community that we were in, and for the students as well. So.
Okay, that was very well said in a minute. Amia, I'm pleased, and correct me if I didn't say your name properly.
Hi, my name's Amaya. I would agree with Faina in that my first act of social justice was in high school. I think the first protests I've ever participated in was in high school, when we all like walked out at the same time, kind of like across, I don't know if it was, I think it was like within New York City, but it was definitely in like Brooklyn. We all walked out at the same time, just out of our classes in solidarity with the victims of a high school shooting. I don't remember the name of exactly which one it was, but because there's so many, that's also the issue. But yeah, I was basically walking out in solidarity with them, and also like trying to draw attention to the need for stricter gun laws.
Okay. Julie, that's an easy name. That's right? Julie?
Yep. Yeah. Hi, I'm Julie. I'm a major in psychology. And yeah, similar to Amaya, I was also a part of an organization in my high school where we led the walkout that my school had done, or that my school building basically had done, surrounding anti-gun violence. And yeah, so it was like me and a bunch of my friends just were part of like a collective, and we like led the whole thing, and, you know, had the megaphones, all that stuff. So that was like the first time I was actually like involved in planning. And then I had attended like a lot of protests and things throughout my time in high school as well.
But I bet you did something when you were much younger. I'll give you to the end of this whole session. Think about it. All of you, because the very fact that you're sitting in this class means that there's something about social justice and something about caring that makes you be here. Otherwise, you could choose to be accountants or lawyers or something more valuable money-wise. Wait, now I really, JaQuan Vidot. I'm sorry, I really wish I could pronounce it. Pronounce it.
It's okay. It's JaQuan.
No,
So,
it's very important that people call you by your name.
yeah, no, it's okay though. But a lot of people don't really get it right on the first time. So my name's JaQuan. I'm a student affairs administration graduate student, and so my first act of social justice was same time around high school. So one of my friends was being accused of a crime he didn't commit. He was actually with me the whole day. So when he was accused, I I walked up and then I just left the school. I just left high school because I didn't want to be there while they were just accusing him. So as soon as I left, and everyone just got up and just left as well too. So I don't know if I started something, but like everyone just walked out of the class and the building. So.
Okay, Morgan, 1 minute.
Hi, I'm an anthropology major, and I guess my first act was in junior high. Another student, I made a petition because a teacher was getting fired for no reason, and the school wanted to did replace her with an athletic coach that wasn't qualified.
Okay, well said. Jack.
Hi, so it's a little similar to a lot of other people, but also in high school, there was like the nationwide walkout in solidarity with the students killed in a school shooting. So I just participated in that.
Which school shooting was that?
I want to say it was the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas one. Although, yeah, again, there are so many of them, it's kind of hard to keep track.
See, that's what's so terrible, is that you actually can't even remember. I'm not making it as personal, but you can't remember which shooting. That means how many shootings have there been? And, you know, really, what do we want to do about it? Because if it's an act of solidarity, yes, but do you really mean it? And I will illustrate that when I tell you my story. Now, this I really cannot pronounce. Granado I can pronounce. Eudes, no, can't be. Is it? Hello? Yes.
Is my stuff working this time? Can you hear me?
So just real quick, Eudes, sometimes he has the connection for him is not always great. So I ask him to use the chat sometimes to answer the question. So Eudes, if you could use the chat for us, I can.
Typing right now.
Yeah. So.
Okay, so then while you're doing the chat, I'll talk to Sydney. Sydney?
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, my mute button sometimes doesn't work. Yeah. I'm a social major. I'm having a hard time trying to think of the first time, because I feel like what you said, like, yeah, there's gonna be a lot of little things that I'm going to like think about during this discussion. The most like prominent one that's standing out in my head is basically through the past like couple years with the Black Lives Matter movement, and like my parents live in Arizona, so I've stayed a bunch of time there. So there's been like a bunch of like little like kind of like marches, like more like occupation, like in a field where like a bunch of people are sharing stories and stuff. I've gone to a couple of those, and a couple in Westchester. It's the most thing that's coming to my mind.
You should go back a long way before then. Something happened long that you did something good. I'm not talking about something bad. Jack, why are these people all turning off their cameras all of a sudden? Jack? Gone. Morgan?
Oh, I already
Morgan?
went. Can you hear me?
Yes, now I know you. Yes, fine.
Oh yeah, I
So-
already went, yeah.
I seem to be missing. Where's Jennifer?
I'm right here. I teach in.
Yes, Jennifer, you were on last night, right?
Yes, yeah,
We met
exactly.
you last night, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah, I'm a faculty member in the teaching, learning, and ed
So,
leadership.
but you are here because of something that happened, the social justice that you first did.
Well, you know, it's a work. I'm a work in progress, I guess, like everyone else. So always interested to find out about restorative justice because I've seen it in the schools a lot. Working sometimes better than others. So I'm interested in finding out more. I think my first act of social justice was probably in elementary school when there was this really awful bullying teacher. And I went and talked to the principal about this guy to get him removed, which he eventually was actually.
Well, there you are, you succeeded.
Yeah.
So now, instead of making you do this, just if anybody wants to join that conversation and tell me, just put up your hand and let's do it. Okay, I'm not going to go one by one because this is painful. No?
Go ahead,
Okay.
Anthony, or Alexa or Anthony. Go ahead. Just unmute yourselves.
I was gonna say, I don't remember the first instance, but the biggest instance that I remember of collective justice was when I was in high school. I used to work for Catholic charities, and I had connections with Alianza. They're both like after school programs for inner city youth. And at the time, the schools that I was working in, they were trying to cut major budgets on after school programs, but they were allowing like budget increases in other departments. So that was the first time that we had like a demonstration outside of the school fighting for those kids' rights to the FAIR program. And then eventually, like, it just became a bigger thing where we had like petitions, signs, and it was more organized than initially when we just all got together just to protest.
Okay, so for those who didn't hear me last night, my first act of social justice, you've probably recognized by now that my accent's not very Israeli. Hopefully you could recognize. I come originally from South Africa, and I grew up in the anti-apartheid movement. And when I was 5, you see, when I told you you did something much sooner, much earlier, think about it, you'll remember. There was a man who used to bring the milk in the morning with a horse and cart. And one morning he used to beat the horse. So I decided, I love animals, but I always have, that I have to steal the horse. So I took my friend Barbara, I can remember her name, and I'm an old lady, and we went off to the dairy and we stole the horse. And we brought it home to my house and we put it in the tennis court. And then my father came home, and you can imagine how thrilled he was to find a horse in the tennis court. And I was sent to boarding school very soon after that. But if you think about it, it was actually an act of justice, of social justice, because I didn't want that horse to be beaten. It's interesting. So I'm sure that, you know, everybody can remember things they did in high school. But think right back earlier, you know, you've got it in you, otherwise you wouldn't be in this class. So my story kind of with Israel began in 1967, before you were even a sparkle in anybody's eye. I came to Israel because there was the 6-day war, and I thought I'll save Israel, and I ended up working in a chicken house on a kibbutz, and I was planning really to stay just for 6 months. And then what happened is I got married and I had 2 sons. And I brought them up in a very open, liberal house. And I couldn't believe when they had to go to the army. You know, my oldest son, I can recall standing at the bus stop with Iran, you know, you have to go to the army here. It's not a choice. And I remember, unless you want to go to jail and come out of jail and go back into jail and come out of jail. And the question is, and I remember standing there and I couldn't believe that one of my children was going to go to the army and was actually going to hold a weapon. And the tears were pouring down my face. And then there was a year and a month difference between my 2 sons, Iran, the older, and then David. And then David had to go to the army. And the same situation again of not believing that I'm part of this whole situation. They finished the army, and when you finish the army in Israel, you have to every year go to the reserves. And David had gone, most of the kids that serve in the army run away from Israel. After they serve, they go to India or South America, all kinds of places. And it's a kind of escape, you know, a year off. David went to South America and Iran to India. And I remember then when David came back from South America, he became a student at Tel Aviv University, and he was studying for his master's in the philosophy of education. And he was part of the peace movement. And he was part of the officers that signed a paper to say that they wouldn't serve in the occupied territories. And he was called to go to reserves, and it was going to be in the occupied territories, and he was in a total quandary. And then he came to see me and said, look, I don't know what to do. If I don't go, what will happen to my students? He was teaching philosophy to kids who were going to go to the army. Is that the right thing to do? And if I don't go, what happens to my soldiers? Because he was the officer. Is that the right example? And if I do go, I will treat people with dignity, and so will all my soldiers. And I was filled with a sense of dread, but yet he went. And it was only after 3 years that I really discovered what he was talking about, because I was giving a lecture at the American Embassy, and there was a Palestinian sitting in the audience, and he kept looking at me. And he came to talk to me, and he said, I just want to tell you that the day before your son was killed, I drove through that checkpoint, and this beautiful young man, he was very, very tall, came to the car and said, I need to see your papers. It's my duty. I'll do it as fast as possible. And they got into a conversation, and they spoke for maybe half an hour, I don't know. And he said, and the next day, when I heard that your son was killed, this is a Palestinian, I was so sorry. You see, this is the whole essence of everything that I believe in, that when you see the humanity in the other, that's the beginning of the end of conflict. In any event, when the soldiers actually came to tell me that David had been killed by a Palestinian sniper, apparently one of the first things that I said is, you may not kill anybody in the name of my child. And that was the beginning for me of a very, very long exploration of what the meaning of reconciliation, what's the meaning of restorative justice? What was I going to do with all of this? And so a religious Jewish man came to see me and got me to join the Parent Circle, which is a group of more than 600 families who've all lost an immediate family member to the conflict. And we work for reconciliation and nonviolence. And he took me to, this man invited me to a weekend in East Jerusalem to meet Israeli and Palestinian bereaved families. And I said, I really don't want to do that, but he almost forced me to do that. And I remember sitting on a table, a round table, and looking into the eyes of the Palestinian mothers and realizing that actually we shared the same pain. And that if we stood at the grave, the tears that fell into that grave were the same color. And that if we stood together on the stage and spoke in the same voice, that would be the most powerful example to anybody. If we could do that, then anybody can. And this really changed my life, because I went on I closed my office and I decided I'm going to devote my life to this organization. And I started to travel all over the world with a Palestinian partner. And wherever we went, like to Congress, to the House of Lords, to hip hop concerts, I mean, you can't imagine, wherever they invited me, I went to talk together with a partner. And I really was very, very pleased with myself, you know. And then one night I was sitting at my computer. I came home from one of these trips, and there was another knock on my door. And when I went to the door, I saw 3 soldiers. When you see 3 soldiers, it can only mean one thing. So I slammed the door in their face. And they kept knocking and knocking and knocking. And I said, I can't lose another child. It's just not possible. And eventually I opened the door, and they came to tell me that they caught the man that killed David. Now here's where it becomes difficult. You see, it's easy to talk about peace and reconciliation and read bad poetry and make rainbows and peace and all of this stuff. But do you actually mean what you're saying? I've been going all over the world and talking about this, but I hadn't been tested by seeing the face of the man that actually killed my son. And I thought, I can't do this work. It's not in integrity anymore. I can't go around talking and if I'm not willing to walk the talk. And so eventually, after about 3 months of not sleeping, I wrote a letter to the family of Thaya. That's the name of the man who killed David. And in the letter, I told them about the parent circle, that we were 600 families, and that we want there to be a framework for a reconciliation process as an integral part of any future political peace agreement. We also, I told them about David and who he was. And you never know who the person is behind the gun. Please don't decide that all soldiers are these vicious monsters wanting to go out and kill everybody. And I also said we needed to meet. We owed it to our children and grandchildren. So 2 Palestinians from our group took the letter to the family, and you can imagine how shocked they were. They didn't expect to get anything like that. And they said, if everybody will sign on this, then there could be peace. And I, of course, am not the most patient character in the Middle East. I imagine there will definitely be some kind of mail or letter from Thaya, that's the name of the sniper. I'm sure that he's going to, he'll be in touch with me. And I just want to tell you one thing, if you don't hear anything else, reconciliation is not instant coffee. It doesn't happen to everybody overnight. It may never happen, and it may take years. So even though I was not willing to really listen to that advice, there's an extraordinary man called Dan Baron. He was a professor at Beersheba University, and I went to talk to him after they caught the sniper to see what I could do. And he said, Robi, you may never hear from this guy. And I said, oh no, impossible, I will, blah, blah. And so it took more or less 3 years. And I got a letter from Thaya, which came over a website, a very famous website for Palestinians, in which he said that I am completely crazy and that I should stay away from his family, and that he killed 10 people to free Palestine. But you see, I knew that he killed 10 people because when he was a little boy, his parents had told the Palestinians that when he was a very little boy, he saw his uncle violently killed by the Israeli army, and he lost 2 further uncles in the second uprising. And so he went on a path of revenge. He became a folk hero because he killed 10 people. And so he was in jail, and they wrote a book about him and made a film. And, it was like a kind of freeing situation for me, because that is the moment that I can almost say with absolute definitely when I gave up being a victim. And this victimhood is what holds you back from freedom. It's like, it's not a question of forgiving. Forgiving is another long thing which we're going to talk about. But it was giving up this fact that I needed, my life was contingent with what this man did and what he would do. And that now, he made it very clear. And so I just decided, okay, if this is the case, I want to meet him because I want there to be a completion. I'm not looking for him to be repentant. I'm not looking for anything. I don't even know for what at this point. And so because of that, 2 filmmakers came to talk to me and said, let's go to South Africa and make a film about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Do you guys all know what that is? Somebody, shake your head, say yes, no. Do they know what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is? Jenny, would you tell them?
Yeah, some of them do, some of them not yet. So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is a process that governments and nations go through after a period of conflict to listen to what has been the harm and the violence that has happened after. And usually this involves taking testimonies from the victims of the violence themselves. And it's also a way to hold some kind of accountability for the people that committed that violence. It differs from country to country. Some countries say we're not going to press charges or put any of the perpetrators in jail because we are in looking for a national reconciliation, and that's the thing that we have to do. Other countries say we are going to name them and we are going to start a different criminal process if needed for the big, like kind of big people. But basically it's a process to take account of what happened so that they could move forward after conflict has officially ended.
Well, it was very interesting because we wanted to meet perpetrators and victims who had been to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and had given evidence. For victims who I would call survivors, I don't call myself a victim, I see myself as a survivor, but for them it was the most extraordinary thing because they could now tell their story to somebody who would listen. A whole nation heard this. It was broadcast all day long in South Africa, which made it was when Mandela came out of jail, but ants on the ground had been working on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for many, many years. And this is what prevented a bloodbath in South Africa, I'm totally convinced. And then the perpetrators came. It was called the Truth and Reconciliation because the truth part of it was that the perpetrators had to say exactly what they had done. And if they were believed, they got amnesty. And why did they want the truth? Because there were so many families who didn't know what happened to their children. I met many of these mothers, and this was a way for them to find out exactly what happened. And so they could get some kind of closure and solace because they hadn't known. And people whose children disappear or family members disappear live with that for years and years and years. They might think that maybe that person didn't really die, maybe they'll come back. It's a very, very complicated situation. They got amnesty, the perpetrators got amnesty if the judges, so-called judges, believed them. So there was no clause in the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission for forgiving or for anything like that. This was simply to find the truth. If they told the truth, they got amnesty. And even the most heinous of crimes were people who had committed them were given amnesty. And many of them were glad that the government could give them amnesty and that we didn't have to forgive them. The other reason that I went to South Africa was also to find out what the meaning of forgiving is. It's a very complicated thing. You know, when you talk about restorative justice, and I'm going to tell you a story about restorative justice because I find this a very interesting, and I believe that this is the future. I went to an amazing conference in San Sebastian in Spain, and there were people from all over the world, and there was a man who'd been in jail for 20 years from the Basque Country in Spain. He was one of the leaders of the uprising, and they had committed some very dreadful crimes. And he was there with some of the survivors from the acts that he'd committed. And next to him was a man from Italy who had been part of blowing up a train in the 80s. And he was there with this woman who was the daughter of somebody who died in that train that he blew up. These are things that are difficult to even begin to imagine. And so the Basque Country guy said, I ask people to forgive me. And the Italian got furious and said, you have no right to ask people to forgive you. Forgiving is a gift. And if you ask somebody and they don't want to forgive you, you're putting something else on their shoulders as well. It was a very interesting discussion, and watching this in front of me with survivors and perpetrators and seeing the possibility of how can I call it, of completion, you know, it was incredible. So when I went to South Africa, this is what I was looking to understand in myself, this possibility of forgiving. What does it mean? So I can just ask a couple of you, because it's not a big class. Julie, what's your definition of forgiving?
That's a heavy question.
And by the way, I don't know the answer, okay? So you just tell me what it is for you.
I think that, I mean, I personally have a lot of trouble with forgiving because I think it's a lot more complex than people tend to think it is. I guess for me, it's like being at peace with yourself and being at peace with whatever was what wrong was done onto you. And like being able to look back at that experience and not have it be so like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, I guess, yeah, just like being at peace with your past and whatever experience you had to forgive, and like just being able to be content and like the
Must the person who committed the crime be repentant?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Does the person who committed the crime, do you think they need to be repentant?
I don't
Do they
think
need to be sorry for what they did?
No, I don't think that. I think, yeah, because there's a lot of situations where I've needed to forgive and people weren't sorry and people weren't repentant and didn't take accountability. So I think it's more of like an individual process for me than getting something from someone else. But obviously that's very situational, and I don't think that can be applied universally.
Jesse, what do you think?
I honestly think that
I don't know the answer.
okay. For me personally, I think that you need to actually have an understanding of like what happened to you, and I guess just accept the fact that it happened to you, and maybe if you finally accept that fact, maybe you can forgive that person that did that wrong to you. But sometimes, personally, I don't think it's possible to forgive someone. Maybe they did something that was too terrible to you, or terrible to someone that you knew, that it's impossible to forgive.
What about Sarah? Sarah, not Sarah, right? If it was Israeli, it was Sarah.
Either or. I would say that forgiveness can be an understanding that you're not necessarily forgetting what happened, done onto you by another person, but it is where you are trying to move forward. And I do not think that repentance from another person defines whether forgiveness is had. I think that you put it well when you said that you're like, what from my understanding is you can't necessarily get something out of a person. And Julie said it too, where it's at peace with yourself. So I very much agree with that.
So what actually happened is I wanted to meet this woman that I'd heard went to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. She was white, and if we want to give her a label, we can say that she was probably in the anti-apartheid, in the pro-apartheid movement, which wasn't true. She went to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and she said to the three guys who killed her daughter, "I forgive you." And I wanted to know what this woman meant. So I went to meet her. And she said, for me, forgiving is giving up your just right to revenge. And then I met the man who actually sent these guys to kill her daughter. And he said, by her forgiving me, she has released me from the prison of my inhumanity. And I thought that was amazing. You know, it was such a powerful statement. Fina, is it Fina? Hello?
It's Faina.
Yeah, is it Fina? Faina, sorry. What's your definition? I'm terrible with names. Sorry.
I guess similar to what everyone has been saying is like at peace with yourself, like having a making a conscious decision to move on and just be content with who you are and where you are in life.
So you mean that you give up your right to justice?
I don't know. I don't know how to respond to that actually. I guess it's very situational, and it depends on who you are as a person and what you see as justice, and if you would rather just be content with yourself rather than like approach situations that could be altering to your mental health. Depends.
You know, it's like asking yourself, do I give up my right to justice? Is it okay what the person did? Can they do it again? Do I forget? Now, here's the question. How will I ever forget what happened to David or my child? Never. But that doesn't mean that I cannot be at peace with myself. And there's also an element of understanding why this guy actually did that. Why did he kill 10 people? And the understanding that came out of the fact that he'd lived in an occupied place for so many years, and he lost his uncle very violently, and he lost 2 uncles in the second uprising. There's understanding why he did it. It doesn't mean that you condone. There's a difference. So how would you, if I said to you, okay, we'll ask Jack. Jack, if I said to you, what would you say to Thaya if I put you in a cell to represent me?
I don't know. I mean, that's a really difficult question. Because if somebody inflicted sort of like a personal tragedy. But I guess it comes down to like trying to understand the other person. Everyone's sort of like, everyone acts like righteously from their own perspective. He also like endured a lot of pain, and then growing up and then brought that out on others. So I guess it's not necessarily fair to make complete value judgments against him, if that makes any sense.
It's like one would sort of ask the question, how would you actually negotiate? Who would be the go-between? Where does culture come into all of this? And why am I saying all of this? I'll explain to you. Because when I wanted to go and meet with Thaya, one of the most famous restorative justice people called Mark Umbright, I'm sure you've probably heard of him. He's from St. Paul University, I think, in Minnesota. And he has a lot of books about restorative justice. And he invited me to go to Minnesota. Never again, it was freezing. I've never been so cold in my life. But anyhow, he offered to be the go-between. I don't use the word mediator. I don't like that because it has some kind of compromise somewhere around. So he wanted to come to Israel and be the go-between between me and Thaya. The whole restorative process about talking to him and coming back to me and finding out if he was comfortable and seeing if I'm comfortable. Why do you think I would say no to such a person? That I didn't want him to be the mediator. Timothy. See, I'm picking all the names that I can say. Timothy?
Well, I guess because there would be like, or I guess, could you repeat the question, I guess, because.
Sorry?
Could you repeat the question?
Why would I not want one of the most famous restorative justice practices to be the go-between between me and the man who killed my son? Why would I not want him?
Well, I guess in a sense it would make it less genuine in a sense, because it's kind of like you're being put in someone that is trained to facilitate these kind of things is there to facilitate it. So it's less of a, it's less genuine of a interaction, I guess.
Vialexa. Is that right, what I just said?
Yeah, Vialexa.
That's a nice.
Sorry?
Why would I not want the most famous, why would I not want the most famous restorative justice or one of the most famous restorative justice practitioners to be the go-between between me and the man who killed my son?
That's a really tough question. Wow. I think that there's a level of like, I think while you were talking, the only thing that was like running through my head was that you wanted it to be more personable. Like at the end of the day, like a relationship between a mother and a son, or well, I'm not a mother myself, but like, I think bringing in other people would be very difficult. And I don't even know if I'm answering your question correctly. But I think just keeping your son's story alive is important. But yeah, that's a really tough question.
No, I think that, does anybody have something to say about why would I not want this? It's not that I don't want the process of the go-between. You can't do restorative justice. I can't go into the jail on my own and just start this whole process. It's a two-sided process. The person has to agree. Why? How do you say your name? Gargi?
Yes,
Tell me why.
that's correct.
Why would I not?
Okay, so I think the two most affected. Right?
I think we lost you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so I think the two most affected people would be the perpetrator and the survivor. The mediator might be an expert in the field, but he's not party to the crime committed. He was not wronged, nor was he the wrongdoer. So I think it has to be a process between the survivor and the perpetrator where they reach a point of reconciliation with, like you said, it's a two-way process. So for the survivor to begin the process of healing, the survivor needs to forgive and the perpetrator needs to move on from feelings of guilt. Need to forgive in order to start the process of healing. The survivor needs to start the healing process, and the perpetrator needs to move on from guilt, feelings of guilt, and to maybe repentance. But I don't think a third person should be involved.
I think that you've lost the whole, I think I didn't explain myself properly. The reason that I didn't want this man to be the go-between has nothing to do with him. It is because I wanted somebody whose culture and who would understand the man who killed David. In other words, language. This man is American, doesn't speak Arabic. This man has never been in a jail here. This man doesn't understand the culture of the Palestinian people. So why would I want him to be the go-between when maybe I could find somebody? There has to be somebody who would be the person who goes before. You don't just rush in. I mean, you know this process of restorative justice, right? So who would I choose that would be the most suitable person for me? And what I was talking about is not the process. It's the person that you would trust the most to be that go-between. And so the person that I chose is another member of the parent circle. I don't know if any of you heard him the other night. His name is Bassam Aramin. Bassam is a Palestinian. Our relationship today is beyond the conflict. We are now family. Bassam had been in jail for 7 years. He had, for political activities in the first uprising. You would never believe it because he's a small guy with had polio and limps, and he just, you would never imagine that this man would be willing to do the things that he did. And while he was in jail, he actually saw a film about the Holocaust. And what happened to him was that he went through some kind of form of transformation, because in the beginning, he was rather pleased that the film was about the Holocaust, because he wanted to see the Jews being punished because they were his jailers. But suddenly he watched this film and he started to cry. And that's when this a change started to become within this man. And he left jail with the Oslo Accord, which was an agreement, a peace agreement. And he was working within his own society for nonviolence. And then he started an organization called Combatants for Peace, who we have a joint ceremony with every year on Memorial Day. And his daughter, Abir, was killed, a 10-year-old kid was killed by an Israeli soldier. And that's when he joined the Parent Circle. So here's a person, and by the way, he went to Bradford University afterwards and did his master's in Holocaust studies. He's an incredible man, and I'm proud to have him as a friend and a family member. So he's the one that I would choose above anybody, because he would understand the culture, because he would know how to talk, because he knew the language. That's what I was trying to get at. There is a whole rhetoric of peacemaking and a rhetoric that you have to learn over time, because one is very tempted to close people down. That's the easiest thing on earth, right? But if you learn to give people their dignity and you learn to talk to them in a certain way, then you can achieve the most incredible things. If you don't take away their dignity and you respect them and you listen with empathy, even if you don't agree. So what are we doing, Nadia? Are they supposed to ask questions, or what am I supposed to do? Tell me.
That's entirely up to you and to Jenny and how you'd like to structure this. How would you like this to go?
Yeah, thank you,
How much time
Robbie.
have we got?
We have about 40 minutes of a little bit less than 40 minutes. Yeah, I want to open it up for maybe a conversation and some questions that folks that is emerging for you all. I think just thinking about the stories that we've heard so far around survivors and their conceptions of healing and justice, and what does that have looked like. And so thinking, just want to like have you weave together this thing that we've been doing all semester around how do we learn from survivors themselves, how they understand justice and how they understand healing. And now we have the opportunity of having Robi here, who's shared a little bit about their story with us. So any questions that can help us continue to build theory from the ground up around our understanding of justice. Just wanted to put that frame there. And also structures, right? Robi is really thinking, bringing up to this level of culture. And in the US, we think about what does it mean to have somebody that connects with us both at an identity level, a political level, a cultural, historical level, through the lens of power and privilege when they're being involved in part of our justice models. So the role of systems like white supremacy, the role of systems like sexism, the role of systems, what is the role of systems when we're listening to the stories that we're listening to from survivors themselves. So that's just a little gist of what I want my students to really connect to when we are talking to Robi right now. But of course, any other questions? So Amaya, I see you with your hand up, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started.
Thank you for sharing your story with us. My question, I'm here.
Where are you?
I don't know.
On the top. Okay, I see you now.
Hi. My question is that, do you think that you need to forgive in order to heal around the situation? Like, do you think that healing can happen without forgiveness? I know for me personally, I'm very stubborn, and that's why I'm asking this question, because I feel like I think it's been a lot harder for me to kind of like accept situations that I've been through and kind of do the internal work to heal. But it's very hard for me to forgive someone. So I was just wondering, like, do you feel that that's possible?
See, the thing is, what you've done is you've chosen to be a victim, really, because the person that you have to be at peace with is yourself. And as soon as if you're hanging on to, and your life is contingent on what the person you're angry with will do, he may never be repentant or never say sorry or never care or not even know that you exist anymore. That's how it is. So the question is, are you going to live with that and be a victim of the circumstance? Or can you, and when you say forgive, it's again, what do you mean when you say you forgive? I don't know. I don't know what the circumstances are, but I can only tell you that hanging on to victimhood is the most pernicious thing that you can imagine. It's poison. If you watch people, so many bereaved parents, and what is victimhood? Why do so many people who've lost see themselves as victims? Because they don't, in many ways, and it's so understandable. If you give up being a victim, it means maybe you forgot the person who got killed, or maybe it's because, you think you will be disloyal. There's so many things that go on around it. So it's very difficult, but I can only tell you, if you hang on and you call yourself stubborn, there's nothing that will change. You'll be stuck forever. So why not just, it's very difficult to talk to people and say, I'm sorry, for instance, and mean it. I mean, I don't know if you've watched, it would be a very interesting exercise for you to watch the apology that the Canadians gave. I'm not talking about Trudeau, before, to the Native Americans in Canada, and to watch the Aborigines in Australia. Those were two apologies. You would find it amazing which one you would buy. Is that apology really, in Hebrew you say amiti, which means, is it genuine? Or was it just lip service? And if you watch, you can open up YouTube and you'll find this, and you'll watch those two apologies, and you'll understand how people will pick up if you are genuine or not. And last night I was talking together with a Palestinian called Laila, and the thing that changed her whole life was that this Israeli woman, she'd lost her baby and she'd never told the story, and this Israeli woman came and knelt down in front of her while she was crying, because she was sitting, and tried to hug her and said, I'm sorry. And she said, why? You don't have to be sorry. She said, yes, but it was my nation that did this. And that was such an emotional breakthrough for her that it changed her whole life. Apologies are the most extraordinary thing if you actually mean it. And it's maybe something you could think about. I don't know.
Thank you.
So Jenny, I don't know if this is a practice in your class. I usually make it a practice in my class, but I like to hear from everybody in every class session. I don't think we've heard from you yet.
Okay, I'm really looking at the idea of forgiveness right now.
Could you put on your camera?
Yeah, my camera is on. I'm on the screen.
It's on.
Well, I don't see. Wait, I don't see you.
You might have to scroll on your screen to find mine. I'm wearing like a red sweater.
No, I can see the yellow green. I can see the yellow. Aldrich is your surname?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I don't see you.
Oh,
All right, never mind.
We do. The rest of us do. I'm not sure why you don't.
Okay.
I mean, my camera's on. I mean, I'm sitting here. I'm just listening intently to the idea of forgiveness. Personally, I don't think I'm learning in my mid adulthood that I'm not great at forgiveness at all. I don't know. I'm really thinking about it because earlier I was actually discussing a war that happened between my tribe and the father of my son's tribe. So I'm like, I got a lot of like static on me right now that I'm just kind of like intently listening about it and really idealizing what does forgiveness mean. But for me, the way I've looked at like maybe how things function are how we internalize who internalizes the pain and how we've been internalizing it, and does it continue if you don't forgive? Does it just continuously does this sort of residual pain just continuously get passed down if we don't forgive? So I mean, I'm just trying to be a good listener right now. So I don't have a specific question, but if I'm opening my heart up to being a good listener, that's like 100% of me. So I don't have a question right now, but I am taking notes on my paper here. So yeah.
Thank you. I don't know why I've got all this black. I can hardly see anybody. I can just see the top line up to Jack. From there on, it's all black.
I have a question. Sorry.
Okay.
What's your perspective on the conflict? Like, I just want to understand, like, what you think about it.
Whoa, Jesse, please. I didn't understand a word you said.
What's
Can you speak slowly? Sorry.
What's your perspective on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Like, what do you think about it?
What sort of answer do you want?
No, I just want your opinion.
I don't think about the conflict, I act about the conflict. Whatever I'm doing in my life now is to stop the occupation, is to try to look for ways to reconcile. As dramatic as our politics are, and I mean, going together with the rest of the world where there's so much polarization, I spent my life trying to change things. So it's the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is almost impossible to understand. It's so much everybody's stuck in what they are, in their opinions, and not willing to move forward. And like most of the world, there's this tendency to go towards the right. But I really don't want to get involved in political discussions, because that's not what we're talking about. The Israeli-Palestinian, if you ask me, how do we make emotional breakthroughs, that I could tell you. If you ask me, how does a Palestinian mother come to the parent circle and tell, because she's never had an opportunity to tell her story, sorry, and how she comes and how she tells the story in the beginning in a completely graphic way. So it's like where the bullet went, how far, how much blood was there, how far was the gun away, all of that part of it. But slowly, with telling of the story, what happens is they eventually start to talk about the person that died. And that is the next step in healing, because so many people don't get an opportunity to tell their stories. And I think your community now is so filled with bereaved people who've lost family members that this is something that you have to reach out to. You know, I mean, you can worry about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but it would be better if you try to worry about the people around you where you can really make a difference, where you've lost, you know, people who've lost members of their family and they couldn't say goodbye. That's one of the most terrible things. And one of the things that we do is we try to recommend that somebody write a letter to the person they lost and tell them what's happened and to say goodbye. I'm a big believer in writing. I have a book that I'm writing. It's Letters to David. But it's not a monument to misery. It's also funny things as well. So I kind of changed the subject because I really don't want to talk about politics.
Go ahead, Morgan.
Hi, Robbie. I hope you can see me.
This is so sad. Ah, yeah, I can see
Do you see
you.
me?
Yay.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for talking with us today. I have a couple of questions, comments. The first question is, you just talked about, you obviously are probably listening to so many stories of parents who've had and other people who've lost loved ones in the same experience. And here you are constantly opening about your experience and this pain. So I want to know how you get through it day by day. What do you do? I mean, you're talking about forgiveness, you're talking about pain, you're constantly reminded about it. I just am curious, like, how you keep your strength, and keep, because I mean, there's topics that pain me, and sometimes it's kind of hard, and I haven't experienced near to what you experienced, so I'm just kind of curious.
I think when you really, really believe in something, I kept saying tonight on the webinar that I was on before, it's about this joint ceremony that we do. And I kept saying, bring people who've lost onto to watch this, because they will see people who've also lost but have taken their grief and turned it into making a difference in the world. And when you have something to get up for in the morning, and when you really believe what you're talking about, it's I'm very grateful for that. How extraordinary is my life that I can talk to people all over the world, because actually for the past 15 years, more or less, I have been traveling nonstop all over the world, talking to people, because our message isn't local. It's an international message. It's a message of listening to the humanity of the other with empathy, even if you don't agree. Let me give you an example. Charlottesville, right? I'll give you an example that's close to home. I was watching what happened in Charlottesville, and I remember the mother of this woman that was killed said, "You may have killed my daughter, but you're magnifying her voice." And then I thought to myself, if white privileged people would have gone into the park together with African Black Americans who had slavery background, and they sat where that statue was in Charlottesville, and each one would say why you should remove the statue or why you should keep it. It isn't that everybody would turn into Martin Luther King, okay? But what would happen is that they would listen with empathy and begin to understand how the other sees their history. We run a program in the Parent Circle, which is called History Through the Human Eye. It's a parallel narrative program because everybody sees their history differently. So if you will ask a Palestinian, what was 1948? What they'll say to you, it was the Nakba, which means the catastrophe, when they were thrown out of their homes, when they ran away, when the war was with Israel. But if you ask Israelis, 1948 was the declaration of the State of Israel, where everybody, which was a joyous occasion. So taking each date in your history and looking at that date to see through your eyes, a Palestinian or an Israeli eye, it would be something completely different. It doesn't mean that you would agree in the end, but it certainly means that you would have some kind of empathy for the other's opinion. And so there's so many things that people can do that for me, this life is almost extraordinary. I mean, even now since the corona, we had to adapt everything and put it all our programs, this parallel narrative program, we put it online. And it's extraordinary to see how it still works. It's like Palestinians and Israelis exploring their history and telling stories, because I promise you that if you took your whole class and you sat for like 3 days, and each one of you would say where your grandparents came from and why. And there's always a nerd in the class that everybody doesn't like. When they share with you, you will find you will suddenly have a different attitude altogether. It's the most binding thing. I did that in San Diego, at the University of San Diego. We had a class and nobody knew anything about Israel and Palestine. And they also didn't know each other. I bet you that so many people in a class, they have no idea who else is in the class. And so, you know, you're lacking in all of those storytelling, which is the most extraordinary way of building bridges between people who you think have absolutely nothing in common with. I promise you, if we sat now and I asked each of you where your grandparents came from, or your great-grandparents came and why, or why did you get a name Morgan? Why is your name Morgan?
My mom, oh, do you really want to know? It was like a family name. It was like my adopted grandfather's mother's maiden name. That's apparently the reason why I was named it. That's what my mom says. My sister says she just liked the name and she chose it, so who knows? But it was a family name.
And where did they come from?
Morgan? Oh, it was just it was like the maiden name of I guess
where did your family, where did your
my family
grandfather come from?
I don't know about him because he passed away when my mom was 18, but her biological mom, I do know that they came from Mexico, and they're the only family I know where they came from. They're the only side I know where they came from for now.
So this is what makes everybody interesting, is when you sit down, a lot of the work that we do is like sitting, and each person, you get to know each other through your stories. It doesn't have to be my story that is pretty dramatic. It can be just where your grandparents came from, or you know why you are who you are, or what's your name? Why did you get that name? You know, then this whole history of families comes out. It's a binding process.
My other question, really quickly, try to word it or articulate it right. It's not a political question. It's more of I just want to make clear. I don't want to be a political. I want it to be more. You know, you talked about this journey you've had with other Palestinians, especially the one killed your son. But I think about being in your position, and I myself sometimes get very angry, upset at my country and my government. And I would feel that you would feel the same way. Like, you know, your son had to be in the military, your other son had to be in the military. So did you also have to go have a journey with forgiveness with your own government and country?
You know, that's a good question, actually, because everybody asked me after David was killed, was I angry? And I wasn't angry with the man who killed David. I know this sounds crazy, okay? I was much angrier with the army for putting that checkpoint there where it was a political checkpoint, and they removed it the next day and never put it back. So was that security? I don't think so. And it was in the most dangerous place in a deep wadi, so that this sniper stood on the top of the hill and shot 10 people because they couldn't see where the shots were coming from. So yes, I was angry, but what good would that do me? And I had a huge fight with the army because they gave a report which wasn't true. And that's where you can make a difference in your life. I decided I'm not going to accept that. And I got to the chief of staff, and you have no idea what a mess I made. We all stood outside the chief of staff office, and all the televisions came because we didn't like the report they gave. You see, one person can make a difference if they want to. I've got so many stories that I can tell you till tomorrow morning. And if you're going to hang on, you know, to being angry with everybody, then, you know, there's plenty of reasons to be very angry with the government here, I assure you. It is, and you had for several years every reason to be very angry with your administration. And the question is, what do you do with all of this? Do you do something constructive to change it? Or do you sit back and watch television and get really angry every time you see that person or the people that you dislike? It's just taking responsibility and doing something.
Thank you.
I don't want to preach. Do I sound a preacher now?
Go ahead, Fina.
Thank you again, like everyone said, for sharing your story. Just like being reflective, I guess, even in the way that you even began, like the Zoom process, we can see like you've went through something and you are someone that has become stronger because of that. And so I guess kind of reflecting on that, my question would be, what do you perceive as the more effective, I guess maybe it could be personal for you or just as a general, more effective way of healing or a more effective way of receiving justice for survivors, if that's like storytelling or whichever way you might take it?
You know, I don't know what justice is. That's the very sad part. If you think about justice, what needs to happen in Israel and Palestine for there to be a just solution? There's going to have to be a compromise, because if there's going to be a just solution, one side might just have to disappear, and that's not going to happen. So there's always the compromise, and I'm always very worried about the minister of just us and not justice. It's very complicated. Tell me what you just hit your head now.
I guess maybe not the word justice, but rather just like healing, like what for you would be the most effective way of healing or coping with trauma.
I think healing, yes, and I thank you for that. And I more or less told you the story of the Palestinian women who get this wonderful opportunity to share their stories, and the Israeli women. Israeli women have much more support, but by getting this support of being able to tell your story, that is an amazing way of healing. That's why I keep telling you that if you share your stories in the classroom, I don't know if Jenny will approve of that, but I think it might be a wonderful way to really bind together, to do something together, to rectify something that you see as unjust, because then you would be a real team. I mean, I've really noticed with the women's group, for instance, when I first came to the parents' circle, all the women the Palestinian women were outside with their children, and the men were all in the room. So that didn't work for me, and we started a women's group, because I think women have to come to the table now. And so we started a women's group, and today they are probably the most powerful part of the parents' circle, because somebody listened to them, and because they can be, they can be active in this whole peace process, and because they have such an influence in the family home.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Robbie. Yeah, actually, just wanted to comment that part of the work, and this is me, Jenny, speaking, part of the work that we are doing in this class is to be in practice of restorative justice, to create a restorative justice classroom and culture. And so we do community building together. We do share stories. We do really bring in the personal with the things that we're learning about. And I think I do have a question for you, because part of the theory, right, of this practice is that if we bring people together, just as you beautifully are explaining, sort of it humanizes folks, it gives understanding, it also goes to the root causes for why violence happens or harm happens. And the way that this is talked about, at least in what I know in doing this in schools or universities, is that when conflict or harm happens in a community, if there's a strong base of relationship building, if there's a strong sense of, I know everybody here, I know a little bit about their story, there's a sense of trust, that when conflict arises, normalizing conflict, right? Probably not violence in the way that we think of it in the stories that you're sharing with us, but more of like, harm, disagreements that may fracture a community, that these relationships are the things that are going to hold the community together, and that we can then have a process of restorative justice within the community because the bonds are strong. I'm wondering if you could speak to how the parent circle, how you have internally dealt with conflict or disagreement, and have you been able to put to the test some of the restorative justice practices that you've done with people that have caused violence internally within your own community or your own organization?
Look, this organization is very, very difficult, because firstly, there's the oppressor or the occupier, and then there are the people who are occupied. There are two different cultures. The Israeli side have had much more opportunity to go to university, to be educated. They live a life of freedom of movement. Freedom of movement is a basic human right. So we have done everything within the parent circle, apart from everybody knowing everybody else's story, to try to make it an equal situation in a very, very unequal situation. So what do we have two offices, one in Beit Jala, which is the West Bank, and one near Tel Aviv. We have two directors, one Palestinian, one Israeli. We have two people in charge of education, Palestinian, Israeli. Everything is two of each. It's like Noah's Ark. And the thing is that nobody can make a decision without the other. And so this makes it very difficult, because it's a difficult culture. Look, if I have to write a brochure, okay, I write all the time, I do op-eds, all this stuff, I can do it in about 2 hours, maybe, the whole brochure or report. But if I write it all on by myself and I don't show it to my Palestinian partner, and I just think, well, I can do it for him because I'm so clever, then the whole thing, this has all got to be building trust between people. And you're quite right, when you do build a trust, when a person knows who they're dealing with, it's much easier. But don't forget that there is already between us as Palestinians and Israelis an innate sympathy, because that innate sympathy comes from the fact that we share a loss, that the pain is the same pain. And so that already starts it off, but it certainly isn't part of really understanding each other's national narrative or narratives of what happened during wars. And that's why we created this program, which I told you about in the beginning, which is called History Through the Human Eye. So we take 15 Palestinians and 15 Israelis, usually from the same profession. We started this all with Georgetown University. 12 of us went there to train the trainer, and we created this program. And it's a way of looking at history. So what we would do is, the very beginning, the two facilitators in a course like this would be two bereaved people. But the people who come to the courses are not bereaved. We have something like 1,000, more than 1,000 alumni now who have done this process. What happens is they come, they sit and share their stories. They'd make a visit, for instance, to the Holocaust Museum. That's not for comparison of suffering. That's because if you don't understand that part of the Jewish psyche, that fear, you're never going to understand who we are as a nation. The next thing that we do is that we visit a Palestinian village which existed before 1948, before the state of Israel, and which is now the state of Israel. And when we go to this village, two of the people from our group came from that village initially. When we went there, suddenly I see this mother crying because there was nothing left. And she was looking down and she said, look, here's the well that I used to draw water out of as a child. And so then you can understand why is she walking around with a key to a door that's never going to open. You can understand her longing. And then what we have is a lecture by a Palestinian historian and an Israeli historian. And we take the milestones of each something dramatic that happened, which would be 1948, the 67 Six-Day War, the 73 wars, the two uprisings, all the dramatic events that have happened to both sides. And guess what? You'll get a completely different picture from both sides. And I told you before, you don't become Martin Luther King at the end of that, but you have listened with empathy and you now understand how your so-called enemy sees their history. And it's a very, very good process. We take a timeline from 1948 to now. It's like they do it on the floor and each person has to choose a date where something significant happened to them. It's quite an extraordinary process. So this project can easily be adapted. I was in Sri Lanka, where they have a very serious problem of families that have lost people, but they don't know where they are. They've disappeared. Something like what happened in South Africa is all these people who've disappeared with their children. They don't know what happened to their children. And it's exactly what I was telling you about telling stories. When I went to Sri Lanka, I did this workshop somewhere up in the north. Don't ask me, I can't remember the name. But there were about 40 people in the workshop and we were sitting there. And next to me was a woman and I could see she wanted to say something. And I told my story and that's what opens up the room, by the way. The first person that tells the story is the person that will open the room if they're honest. And she said, I looked at her and I said, what? And she started to tell her story and I just stopped the whole workshop and I allowed her to talk maybe for half an hour, I don't know. And she said, she started to tell us how she'd lost her husband and her son. And she told all the graphic details of how it happened. And then I realized she's never told the story before. It was the first time that she told the story and it was so moving. And the next day she came to the training and her whole face was like, I'd washed it clean, you know, it was. So you ask me how I can go on with this work because it's so rewarding to have the honor of being a part of somebody's life or a transformation in somebody's life is such a privilege. To watch somebody like, if you will watch the film tomorrow night, there's a scene where I meet a woman called Bushra. She's Palestinian. She lost her son. I'd gone to a meeting in the West Bank where I'm not really supposed to go. Never mind, I don't care. I'm an old lady. They're not going to push me out there. So I came to this meeting and there were all Israeli women there, Palestinian women, and I was the only Israeli. And this woman walked in and she had a picture of her son around her neck. And then she saw me and she wanted to leave immediately because I was Israeli. But I caught her at the door and I started to ask her who she lost. And please come, I want to hear your story. And I asked her questions all the time about who she lost and how old was he and what happened and what did he look like? All the questions that she could tell me her story. All the time, she was sitting like this with her back to me. And then I asked her if she'd like to see a picture of David. So she reluctantly said yes, and then she turned towards me. And she looked at the picture and she said, Haram. Haram means what a pity. And that was her emotional breakthrough in that she realized that we are both mothers and that we both share the same pain. And she started to travel all over the world with me. We spoke at Lincoln Center to 3,000 people. Can you imagine? And the whole audience stood up and she just told her whole story. She'd never been out of her little village in the West Bank ever. So, I mean, how can you ask me how I can't go on with this work? It's such a privilege to be a part of all of those things and to watch people, because now, you know, she used to be always dressed completely in black. And she would, her children every morning, I said to her, Bushra, every morning when your children open, her other children, when they open their eyes, they see a black morning person. Shouldn't you try to wear some color? Of course, I could say that because I'm also a mother, you know, it's different. But it's just extraordinary to see the transformation in this woman. She now runs dialogue groups. She's been all over the world with me. And when did I realize her transformation was complete? We were in Canada, in Toronto, talking in Women in the World, and she made a joke on the stage. And then I knew, instead of this person all the time, she was funny and light and joyous. So that's the privilege it is of doing this work. And when you finish studying all of this, go and work somewhere on the ground, because that's when you'll get enlightened ideas. It's not enough just to be, sorry, Jenny, to be academic. It's wonderful, but academics and people on the ground must work together. That's why I loved working with Georgetown, because they had also done a lot of work on the ground and could tell us how to evaluate, how to do things, and we could show them the emotional breakthrough that's possible.
Thank you so much, Robbie. Oh, sorry, Nadia.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to thank you, and I know that we are coming at time. In tradition of our course, we usually do a closeout. So if I could just quickly ask everybody who's here, if you're wanting to do a one-word checkout, just how are you feeling after all the wisdom that Robbie has shared? And that was just an invitation that I wanted to give. But Nadia, if you wanted to say some words or wrap us up in other ways, we can open to that as well.
We can do that. Your closeout, your method is fine.
Awesome. So just a one-word checkout of how are you leaving this event in this space after sharing with Robbie. So I'll get us started. I'm grateful, very grateful.
I'm humbled.
I feel mindful.
I feel reflective.
I feel provoked.
I feel somber.
I was also going to say reflective.
Yeah, same here, reflective as well too.
This says awakened in the chat.
I feel inspired.
That's the word I was going to use. Yes, same here.
Changed.
I feel anxious, but I think that comes from a space of reflection.
Anyone else who hasn't gone that wants to share?
It's not really a word that I'm feeling, but I think just memorable. Like this experience is very memorable.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for your time and your lessons and your wisdom. Robi, I really appreciate you sharing all the things that you did today with us. We take it. We're going to take it and we're going to be with it and explore it. And you left it with some really good questions and also some urgency for action. And I really appreciate that.
And I just want to say thank you very much also. And Nadia, I want to thank you for everything you did this whole week. And tomorrow night, you should listen to the two young men who you'd have a lot more in common with than with an endangered species like me. So there are two young boys.
Just so it's for the students in New York, it's tomorrow morning. It's evening for the folks in Israel and Palestine, but it's morning for us. So So don't wait until tomorrow night. Tonight we are.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. I just want to make sure they don't show up 10 hours late. Tonight we're showing One Day After Peace. This is the story that Robi was making reference to in terms of her journey to South Africa, learning about the truth and reconciliation process, bringing that back. So please join us for that if you're interested. And last night we had a great discussion after watching Within the Eye of the Storm. And then, yes, please join us tomorrow morning. I'm going to tell you precise 10 o'clock in the morning, our time in New York. For those of you who are in New York, with the stories of two brothers, Yael and Arab. And so please join us for that. Thank you so much. One of the things that I was left with in this process is perhaps the incompatibility of the terms restorative justice, because we think of justice as this institutional state level process, and restoration is by nature very personal and individual. And I think one of the points that you've been making is how it has to start at a personal level, and then how do we reconcile that with systems of justice, supposed systems of justice that stand in the way sometimes of those kinds of things. And so it'll be interesting to continue, or for me to reflect on that moving forward. But thank you, everybody.
Thank you. I'll see you all at
Thank you.
3:50 in our class Zoom. We'll just take an extra 5 minutes since we're ending at 3:36. So 3:50 back in the class, just for a quick debrief.
Do you have time for one question, Robi? I'm not.
Yes, why not?
Okay. Sorry, I'm a faculty member in the School of Management, and your students don't have to stay if they don't want to. They're welcome to, but I know how if you all have class or something. I teach leadership, and was thinking about all of what you said. First of all, thank you so much for being here. I was just so totally moved, and I'm in awe of you and all of the work that you're doing and really changing the world, which is just, I'm so sorry you've lost your son, and that's what it took in order for you to, go on this journey. But I am so grateful that you're here and helping all of us. So, and for the work that you do, I'm sure, around the whole world. I was thinking about leaders and how we, train leaders. And in cases like layoffs, for example, what the processes you're talking about look like and how they could help both the leaders themselves who describe this laying off people and reducing their workforce as a very traumatic event, and then the survivors of layoffs who are still working in the organization, and then of course the people, the victims of the layoff, in terms of how to come up with a new set of best practices. So for right now, the coaching leaders get is, make sure you tell everybody why you have to lay people off. And then after that, you're done, right? So it's usually about good speeches and good, kind of working with your communication teams and sending out great little pamphlets or emails, and that's it. There's no kind of there is some work about how to work with survivors that are still in the organization, and try to get them motivated to move the organization forward instead of be fearful. But there's nothing like what you're talking about in terms of actually doing some reconciliation work after the layoffs and connecting with the people that were laid off, who I would love to call survivors, but that's the term we use for the people who are still in the organization. Have you done any work with organizational leaders at that kind of level to use the strategies and the incredible things you're talking about?
Well, but the situation here is so different from what you're experiencing. And, we are a social state in many ways. So people who got laid off during the corona, for instance, got salaries for 6 months, maybe more.
Yeah, which is awesome.
And, we've almost, it's like, why is everybody, I think it's 70% of Israel is already vaccinated against corona. So, we're opening up everything. It's because we have a national health system, so that all the clinics all over Israel could work at full speed to give vaccinations. So it's a totally different kind of place. But what I do, you know, if I think about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, for instance, what they should have done is they didn't nurture the people who came to give evidence, the victims or the survivors who came to give evidence. And that's a very bad thing. It's exactly what you're saying. You know, give him a gold watch and he'll push off. It doesn't work like that. And it must be very difficult now. I think that the whole world is going to be in such trauma. You're going to have the trauma also of loss, because so many people have lost.
Yeah.
And there's nobody to deal with this or to even allow them to talk. That's why I kept saying it would be good if they could have this example that bereaved people can use this grief and harness it to make change in the world. It doesn't have to be about the sort of work that we do, but it could certainly be about animals or about, I don't know, some cause that they want, stopping racist behavior, whatever it is, taking that, harnessing that grief to make change.
Yeah, I think that's so important, and thank you for that, because the thing that's right on leaders' plates right now is how to even bring the workforce back into the office. The people are retaliating hard. They don't want to leave home. They're having already kind of grief about having to leave their pets, their home office, their leggings and bare feet, their sweat clothing. And
well, I'd hate for you to see what's at the bottom of what I'm wearing.
Exactly. Well,
but I think there will be still very much work that's going to go on at home.
Mm-hmm.
I think it has its advantages. For instance, in our organization, because Palestinians who come to Israel have to get permits, now they don't need permits. They can just come into my house on Zoom. So that's, and the fact that we can open up the world using Zoom, even though it is beginning to be a bit much, it's still a wonderful way for communication, if you think about it. Where would I ever have spoken to your class if we hadn't have had Zoom, or if I hadn't met Nadia? How did I get to you anyway? Through Stefan.
It was the Together We Remember event. Stephen and I and Carrie Wiggum all heard you speak there, and then I think he reached out to see if we could schedule a time to talk. Yeah, we would have.
I see that they're having on the.
Not have been able to have all 6 of you. We would have been able to bring maybe 2 of you and Layla or Rami and Lasan, but we wouldn't have been able to bring all 6 people. We don't have the resources for that. So it's allowed more diversity of, your shared experiences and stories. It strikes me, Kim, in your example, and that, the core element is getting to people's humanity. And they're thinking about how they interact with everybody else and everything else with humanity, that we lose that. It seems like we lose that, push it aside so easily, and we just become, robots following orders, or people focused on tasks, or, just willing to not think about the consequences rather than to talk to people one-on-one as people and try to understand.
It's going to be interesting to see how people will behave after Corona, what it's going to do to the world. The world will not be the same.
Right.
That's for sure, and will people start considering the fact that half of Africa doesn't have vaccinations, and will Israel now come to its senses and give all the spare vaccinations that we have to the Palestinians? And even if you don't care about the Palestinians, and I care deeply, it's so immoral, illegal, and stupid not to give them vaccinations, because they live in absolute close proximity and buy food from the same supermarket. So how dumb can you be?
Well,
It's a difficult word, and it's like, you know, taking water out of the sea with a teaspoon sometimes, but you just can't give up.
Yeah.
So, folks, I'm going to leave you now because I'm dead tired, to tell you the truth.
Thank you so much.
Have a good
Thank
night.
you so much.
Thank you.
And have a good, where are we? Today's Wednesday.
Today is Wednesday.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you again.